Welcome to the Crownsmen Show. I'm your host, Jared Downey. We have got a very interesting set of guests here today. It's a part two with ZeroNox, but they are expanding. They're expanding their company. They're updating their systems. So a lot to cover. We're going to bring on Robert Cruess. He's the president and co-founder, and Jacob Gotberg. He's the director of engineering at ZeroNox. So we're going to be talking about business development and some technical stuff. So lots to cover. Robert, Jake, welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Great to be on.
Thanks. Pleasure to join you.
We had some technical difficulties getting things going here this morning, so thank you for bearing with us.
No problem. That's why I brought my best engineer.
No, lots of fun, guys. Robert, I think we should start with you because our audience is always changing and expanding. So you just give us that, kind of the elevator pitch of who ZeroNox is, and then we'll obviously dive into the plenty of different elements of it, but just the overall of who the company is.
So we exist to empower communities through innovation. That's our vision. And the way that we're doing that is focusing on the electric powertrain platform. And so what we have done to date is created existing ZeroNox owned brands. We've implemented our ZeroNox electric powertrain platform in them to prove that concept out. And now we're looking to partner with OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, and fleets, and looking to push that electric powertrain platform out to the masses, since we've now perfected it and refined it in certain ways.
That's great. I was curious. I think I asked you this on the last show, but I know some of the goals that you've had have come to fruition. So was the entire business model, was that all part of the original strategy, or did it expand as you saw, OEMs could use our product lines and things like that? Or was it, or did it come on demand, or did you always have that sort of strategy in place?
I would say early on, we were figuring out who we wanted to be. Were we going to be a ZeroNox electric vehicle company? Were we going to be a battery company? And as we kind of went through the paces in the early days, we realized, there's a need for the full electric powertrain platform. And so once we had decided on that, we realized, well, we can't just show up to a large OEM and say, hey, we've got the next best thing. We'd have to actually put it in something and have something to show them to prove that we could do it. And so that's where the different ZeroNox owned brands came about.
I see. I want to talk a little bit. I want to get into some of the proprietary components, because you sent graphs and that, and I actually want to walk through them, which we got to a little bit on the last episode, but I wanted to sort of expand on it. And I think have you updated your, Jake, I'll start with you. Have you updated your powertrain system, or are you in the process of updating it?
Yes and yes. Specifically with the way that the system communicates internally and how the various parts work together. We've really upgraded the command and control systems. I come from an aerospace background, so I keep trying to call it the flight computer, and Rob tells me I can't do that. But the vehicle control unit and the battery, the power distribution in particular, we've done a lot of work. In fact, pulling out some new patents for the way that we're arranging our battery and power distribution system. And along with it, we have some exciting developments in motor technologies and motor controllers. And the sort of cherry on top that ties it all together is now this vehicle control system is coordinating with all these parts and is able to gather that data together in a sort of Internet of Things device, telematics device that constantly streams that up so that we can optimize and look for problems and proactively. And so that telematics system, coupled with the proprietary power distribution unit and our battery system, is just really exciting, seeing it all come together and get applied to these new OEM partners. So it's seeing our tech go from being a ZeroNox branded item to being in household names in other products, and it's just really exciting on the engineering front.
I want to back up a little bit, just, for the sort of the layman terms approach. When you're developing a system like this, what is the main challenge? I mean, obviously, there's electric vehicles have been around and that. So when you're developing your system, what is your sort of, what are the hiccups when you're developing a system, and what do you sort of need to, even in the first version of it, what did you have to figure out to start?
No, that's a great question, Jared. The key to an electric vehicle is that the motors are more of an electrical component than a physical one. So it's software that drives the feel of the vehicle. As you may know, electric motors have insane torque at 0 RPM. They just start at maximum torque profile. And so if you don't tone that down in software, as soon as you press on the pedal, the wheels would spin out, right? You would burn out immediately. And so the programming the acceleration profile, oftentimes we've started with the assumption that all vehicles should feel like a gas engine. And so they mimic the acceleration and behavior in software of an internal combustion engine. And so you have that as kind of the baseline. And now as people have started to drive hybrids and electric vehicles, especially with Tesla in the on-road space, has really changed what we should expect from an electric vehicle. And now we have more access to that, aggressive acceleration, we'll just call it that, but also regenerative braking. Usually an internal combustion engine, if you let off the pedal, you coast, right? There's no deceleration really, unless you're going downhill and you start to engine brake a little bit. Regenerative braking is a completely new world. We could make it so as soon as you let off the pedal, it feels like you're thrown forward because it decelerates so quickly. And so changing that is not a physical issue, it's a software. How do I want this vehicle to feel? And then one layer behind that is, what's the most efficient from the battery's perspective, right? How can I make this vehicle feel exciting and performant and simultaneously maximize my battery life? So getting it to do that requires you to have the motor controller, the battery, and this vehicle control unit talk to each other thousands of times a second and keep updating each other on, here's how the battery's going, here's my temperature, here's what the driver wants me to do. Because these are really fly-by-wire systems. There's not like a cable that runs to the throttle plate. We're not pouring more fuel in when you step on the pedal. It's just the pedal tells me the user wants to go faster.
Right.
And then the flight computer kicks in and translates that into an action. So it is unassuming, right? You look at a vehicle and she's like, I push on the pedal and it goes, and I push on the brake and it stops. And under the hood, so to speak, thousands of times a second, these computers are talking to each other and trying to turn that into an experience that feels nice and is performant and efficient.
Okay.
And
so,
if,
sorry,
if
go
I
ahead,
could,
Robert.
oh yeah, if I could just add to that, Jared, I think that's part of the reason why you see a lot of these manufacturers not being able to bring about an electric version of their product in-house, because it's more than just adding a battery and a motor, right? You can add a battery and motor and make the thing move, but
Right.
you need those the precision controls that Jake was mentioning in the controller, and all these components speaking together to really make it work and perform at the level that they need it to, which is creates obviously a barrier to entry that we take advantage of.
Okay, let's take a moment to thank our sponsors. And first up, we have Daquip. Daquip specializes in the design and manufacturing of attachments for all makes and models of compact excavators, wheel loaders, crawler dozers, and articulated dump trucks. You can choose from any of their engineered attachments, or they can design and build to your specifications. All of their products can be shipped anywhere in North America, hassle-free. If you don't see it, just ask them and they will build it. Check out their website at daquip.com, or you can email info@daquip.com, or you can also call toll-free 1-844-882-8008 for sales, quotes, and support. Next up, we have Optisize. Optisize is a leading edge geophysical acquisition design and software company. Optisize provides innovative seismic survey designs, utilizing the latest field technology and optimizing for advanced processing and quantitative interpretation techniques. Optisize's mission is to bring sustainable exploration solutions to energy development with their custom land footprint reduction technology, EcoSize. EcoSize enables operators to focus on reducing their environmental and greenhouse gas footprint while imaging all their subsurface targets and reducing costs. You can visit them at optisize.com to learn more. We also have Micromine. As your mining projects accelerate, so should your technology. Micromine is a leading software provider to the global mining industry with solutions that support the entire life cycle from early exploration to advanced mine operation. Micromine enables explorers to prospect smarter, model faster, and estimate with greater confidence. They empower mining engineers to optimize strategic mine planning, streamline design, and schedule faster. Micromine's technology supports even the largest mines to gain greater operational control and boost performance. And they provide mining teams with reliable data management solutions to enhance insights, meet compliance, and safeguard digital assets. To learn how Micromine's next generation technology can help you, visit them at micromine.com today. And we also have AutoSol. AutoSol solves the challenges of securely collecting and sharing data at scale for industrial SCADA automation environments. Whether your data is on the edge, on your server, or in the cloud, AutoSol can handle it. Regardless of the protocol, device, communication method, legacy asset, or HMI requirement, AutoSol tailors their historical, real-time, and edge polling engines to suit your needs. Their proven platform sets the standard for data delivery with ultra-reliable access to isolated field devices. Visit autosoln.com for more information. You can also make sure to watch their interview, episode 30 of Crownsmen Energy. And last but not least, we've got SolarSet. Introducing the SolarSet Fold, the new foldable frame solar system brings power to your residential and commercial property and can be shipped worldwide. Like all SolarSet products, the SolarSet Fold comes turnkey, pre-assembled, and is easily transported and installed. Learn more about the SolarSet Fold and their full line of amazing solar systems at solarset.com. Now let's get back to the interview.
Okay, I think I'll let either one of you sort of take this question. But I kind of need to circle back to the ZEPP 2.0 question of the new powertrain system, just because I needed some context. So what has been now, can you go back to what has been updated in comparison to the first version?
So I'll take it, just want to clarify the acronym ZEPP, which stands for ZeroNox Electric Powertrain Platform. And then I'll pass the question on to Jake as an engineer and get his input.
Yeah, this is typical. Okay, so the big difference between the first generation of our powertrain and the second, it was at first we were just figuring it out. We wanted to find a motor that performed as well or better than the gas and was cheap enough to be economically viable and get it all integrated and give it a nice smooth ride. Right, we were just get it on and working, kind of the MVP or minimum viable product approach. Once we did that, and to great success, our first generation, you'll notice the Tuatera behind both of us. It's a great product. Like, it's unreasonably good for a first generation electric vehicle. Some combination of skill, luck, and just excellent execution has made this a great vehicle. But we didn't stop there, right? We wanted to expand this in the off-highway space to other vehicle types. And what we noticed was there was a lot of commonality. So what worked well for this one also extended into forklifts. It extended into, golf carts and people movers. It extended into agricultural equipment. And as an engineer, anytime you see a common core that is working really well and is common between applications, I extracted that and then focused on making that as good as we could and making it generalizable to any vehicle type and any manufacturer. And that's the real key innovation, is instead of making a bespoke energy system for each vehicle, we have this platform that is broadly applicable. And that's the big sort of shift in perspective. And once you do that, there's obvious innovations. So making it modular, making it have the telematics system that's universal to the whole product line. So not only can I get telematic data from my forklifts, but if I have forklifts and some other like a yard truck, the small semis that move around equipment, all of those could be on the same telematics system, and I can have fleet updates from all of them. I can have common charging. Not every system needs to have its own charging cord. Just like with phones, in the early days, every cell phone had a different charging plug. And then finally, we sort of settled on USB-C and Lightning. And that's kind of where we are now, is every ZeroNox vehicle should be able to use the same charging infrastructure.
Right.
And so those innovations all rolled up together with the new patented tech in our battery system really is what separates, I should say, the ZeroNox electric powertrain version 2 from the first generation.
If you again, I'll just keep asking layman questions, and then you can you can try to fix them for me. So if you got your vehicle today, and now 2 years from now, you keep updating, or it's an expandable option or something like that, can your systems do that, or is it sort of built to it's sort of locked together in this one system, and now generation 3.0 will be its own sort of system?
So this is a tricky question. The short answer is, yeah, you can absolutely expand and improve upon the first, that second generation. You could put a third generation battery into a second generation product, and that should just work. And I'm really excited about that as some of these new battery tech kind of rolls down the production line. So it's absolutely feasible that you could put a third generation solid state battery into a second generation vehicle, and it will just pick that up and run seamlessly. The software will work. It will update the database so it knows how to handle the extra energy density, but ultimately it should not change the experience of that vehicle. Now, I want to leave a little hedge, because if we get far enough out into the future, I will want to change some of the standardization we've done to be higher capacity. So there may be a break farther in the future.
Right.
But that's more like 7 to 10 years out, not 3 to 5 years out.
Right. Okay.
And if I could add to that, the platform that we're building is built around scalability and agility. Scalability in terms of we want to be able to do multiple types of products, as Jake was mentioning.
Right.
So, from the forklift to the utility vehicle, standardizing certain charging parts, modular batteries, et cetera. But on the agility side, we want the platform to be agile enough. We know that new technology is coming. We're trying to build it in-house, and we know other people are going to be innovating and inventing as well. And we want to be able to bring that tech into the platform. And so that certainly is how we're developing the platform, to make sure, like Jake mentioned, we can take out as solid state becomes available on the battery side, and we can just, easily move that right in. And that's a big value prop to an OEM or a fleet, because they don't want to have to be worrying about that part. They're relying on us to make sure that we're bringing the tip of the spear innovation to them.
I want to talk about I actually really want to get into the partnerships and the fleet discussion, because obviously it's such a big part of your business, and obviously for viewers who will be interested as well. I do have one last question, Jake. It just a pure engineering question, is that when you're doing this, is there, well, you both saw when we were fighting with our sound equipment, and we're doing some updates, so we had the wrong button hit and all that sort of stuff. There was a right answer to that as we were doing it. In this new expansion that we did, there wasn't exactly a right answer. We found the right equipment, and now there's a right setup that we need to sort of configure. And if you go talk to one person, they're going to tell you to do it a different way. Is there a right answer to what you're building, and it's just as the new technology comes in, you keep plugging it in and expanding it? Or is there, like on your team, will there be 3 of you standing in a circle, and then there's a conversation of how this needs to be actually done? Or is there a right answer as an engineer?
Honestly, I fervently wish there was a right answer. It would make my life a lot easier, is I could just engineer to the correct idea. And it does not exist. There's no consensus in the industry. There's barely consensus in my team on how to move forward. We are in early days still for electrifying America or Canada or the world, frankly, that there needs to be such a fundamental shift in just from infrastructure and how we power these things to how the vehicles themselves operate and how they talk to each other and how the individual components within the vehicle talk to each other. There isn't even consensus on that. So I feel like we're 20 years behind where the sort of on-highway gas vehicles are right now. And we need to get them in the next 5 years at parity or beyond to really kind of meet the moment. So this is not just internally, but industry-wide. There's a lot of thought leaders trying to drive innovation and standardization on the optimal way to engineer an electric vehicle. And it is still the Wild West. Every day, somebody comes out with the next best idea, and then we furiously debate it.
Right. And so, Robert, that really brings me over to you then with these, you wanting to work with OEMs and partnerships and fleets. So now you have, I mean, of course, you feel that you have an advantage. And I want to expand on that a bit, because it must truly give you an advantage that, okay, we actually, like you said, we have the working model. We have something that actually plugs in. I mean, how attractive has that been in these discussions you're having with OEMs and partnerships and fleet developers and things like that?
It's hugely attractive. I know we were at the GIE Expo over in Kentucky, just showing the product on the floor there, the Tuatera that you see in the background. And we had some of the major OEMs coming by to take a look at it and, you know, taking pictures, asking us questions. And I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar companies who have, you know, 100 times the engineers that ZeroNox does, but they're coming and asking us. And these are some of the partnerships that we're going to be coming out with. And so just showing that we have something that works and works well. Obviously, some of those companies have actually come and test drove the Tuatera to see how it performs, because the precision controls, like Jake was mentioning, it's not easy to make that a comfortable drive. It's really a barrier to entry in developing an electric vehicle. And so being able to show them, hey, we've accomplished this and you can test drive it. I feel like that made all the difference in the partnerships that we have developed and are developing right now.
So can you then take your vehicle? We're doing another show, and this was on road vehicles, and the gentleman had worked with, I think it was Tesla, had been some work with Toyota on their powertrain systems and that. If a manufacturer comes in, or an OEM comes in, or sorry, a manufacturer, a brand that people know, and they want to have an electric option, and let's say they're side by side, is there a lot of configuration based on do they have to reconfigure, or can you work within what they've already built?
So you can do both. And if you want the most efficient, you would do what we call in the industry purpose built. And that's where they would reconfigure a lot of it. And we would, you know, build out the vehicle, you know, to fit where it's most efficient to have the motor and the battery and everything else. But the approach that we take when we partner with someone is, let's start with what you have now and let's electrify that, because you're already tooled up for that. So taking a utility vehicle, for instance, just send us the cabs for what you have. We'll remove all the internal combustion engine componentry, and then we'll design around what you have right there, create an electric version. And once we've proved that out, then let's look at, you know, a purpose-built option in the future. But our approach is, let's take what they have now and let's electrify that, and let's save the purpose-built for a little bit later down the road once everyone's comfortable with the new electric counterpart.
How much is for lack of a better word, the bureaucracy of some of these large companies, though, that they want to, but they've got to go through so many steps. We work with them even here, just getting to do a discussion like this. It can be, I mean, PR and communications, and it can go all the way up to the CEO, and then it goes off for review once you even do it. And that's just our little, we're not putting out a product line for them. We're helping them put out a product line. Is that a major bottleneck, or what are some of the bottlenecks when you're trying to put a partnership like that together?
That is definitely a bottleneck. Jake and I are laughing because we've dealt with this quite a few times
from Jake.
Yeah.
I think I want to answer it in, once it gets to me speaking to my counterpart, it moves really smoothly. To get to the point where their engineer is allowed to speak to me is that red tape that you're talking about. And that is just, and I, as an engineer, I don't have to deal with that, but just from what I see from the outside, I do feel a little bad for Rob and the legal team and the product development guys who are just constantly, hey, where are we at on that NDA? Hey, has the president signed off on this?
Yeah.
Hey, when can we get started? And then negotiating those contracts. And once we get down to the engineer on engineer action, it is glorious. They are professional. They have tons of resources. So I'm able to come in and say, okay, you know how you were doing it this way? Well, we're going to remove this and add this. And they get it immediately and they want to move forward. And so it is, that initial hurdle can be daunting, but once it gets rolling, it's been a really smooth process from my side. Now I'll let Rob speak more to the pain on the front end.
That's very interesting though, because that's sort of the experience once you get through it. So yeah, Rob, what about that process? Is there any enjoyment in it still, or does it, I won't even say enjoyment. Is it clear as you've done it more, the steps that are going to have to be taken, that, okay, this is the process that we're going to have to go through?
Yeah, so the enjoyment is that my business partner is a Harvard law grad, and so I pass all that legal on to him. That's the enjoyment for me. But
I need to take management lessons from you.
Yes. But we actually have an awesome process that we have been able to refine through time. And it starts with going and doing a presentation with the potential company and showing them like the Tuatera or the forklift or whatever it is that's kind of a similar type of vehicle, walking them through what our electric powertrain platform looks like, what they could expect with their vehicle. And usually that presentation, and I mean, everyone's all for it.
Right.
Every single manufacturer we have talked to knows that they're going to have to go electric at some point in time in the future. So that's not an issue at all. Is today the right day to do that? Should we wait a year or two? Is the technology far enough along? And then once they get through that hurdle, they're like, okay, we want to move forward. Then, as you mentioned, then the legal battle, it is a little time consuming, because when we're offering this electric powertrain platform, which is a bunch of hardware, proprietary components on our side. On top of that, we're developing software solutions that can be specific to their need, as Jake mentioned, with the precision controls. So who owns that? Who owns the data that's collected from that? So there's a lot of different levels other than I'm just going to go electrify your piece of equipment. And so those are all the things that have to get worked through on kind of the legal side and the agreement side. And I would say in a couple of our partnerships, that process will take longer than it takes us to actually electrify the actual piece of equipment.
Right.
But it's a part of the process. And to your question about, do you have a specific process that you go through with these companies? The answer is yes. We have them sign an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. That's like the basic, I want to electrify this thing and I want you to do it. We start there, because then we have to go through the long contract of, what are the performance metrics, who owns what, what's the time frame? What are you getting paid? How many kits are we going to buy once you prove it out and all that? And that takes a lot of time.
Mhm.
And then we get to move forward to the fun. And that's where, as Jake mentioned, we can hand it off to the engineers and we can actually get work done. And we move forward with the pilot program. Usually we'll do 2 to 4 units, prove out the concept, do the performance metrics. And then once that's done, then we can move on to mass production. So that's what the process that we have kind of developed looks like for a manufacturer.
When you're in that position, though, whether it's you, your business partner, whatever it is, when you're in that position, how much of it is it a technical thing, or is it how much of it is the tone of your voice, or how quickly you follow up to make sure that conversation keeps going? I mean, there's a technical, and then there's that sort of instinct thing of how to keep this relationship going and keeping people engaged. Is that part of the balance, or because there is such demand right now, because obviously all these companies are wanting to do it, is it really just helping walk them through these steps that need to happen?
So the front-facing counterpart on these manufacturers or fleets that I've dealt with, they're normally very easy to work with and just want to get the deal done, but they're having to go through their legal department.
Right.
And
Okay.
so, we basically agree in principle, and then legal is arguing on the verbiage. That's my interpretation of it.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
And I can toss in a quick, on the technical side, there is a threshold of competency that people are looking for. They come with a list of concerns and questions. And honestly, it's almost pro forma at this point. I sit down and say, you're probably worried about this, this, and this. Let me reassure you, here's how we solve each of those issues. And then they go, oh, okay, great. We're ready to move forward. So once you clear that bar, then the process just trucks along. Honestly, the technical challenge at this point is not a technical challenge. It's a procurement. It's a supply chain issue.
Right.
Because we may spec out a motor. Batteries, I've got a pretty good supply of. We're very tightly integrated with our battery manufacturer. The motors and motor controllers can have month-long, lead times, and that can make moving the process along difficult. Once we clear out these supply chain issues, then the technical side is actually not much of a hurdle at all. It is the good business practice following through, but then getting the ownership of the data and the software control. That control software has to be very specific to the vehicle, and we're happy to share ownership of that piece of it, but not the ZeroNox proprietary how we set that software up. So oftentimes it's as much an issue to sort of eliminate the problems. The thing that controls your vehicle, you own. The stuff that we use to make the control software, we own. And once they get that, it usually starts moving better.
Yeah, it's very interesting process. And like this conversation, I've had a lot of different types of conversations on the show. I've never had this one. I've never had someone actually walk through what they're sort of facing. On the fleet side, Robert, is there any sort of projects? I want to jump into the next section to go into sort of that global demand that you mentioned, Jake, and just infrastructure and stuff. I want to sort of paint that picture of what we're looking at in the US and Canada and on a global scale. But are there any sort of fleet integration or systems that sort of stand out to you, Robert, that maybe we could highlight?
Yes. So our largest fleet project right now is with a company over in Africa called the Gotberg group of companies. I believe they're one of the largest companies in Africa, actually. They have like over 60 subsidiaries. Their largest subsidiary, I believe, is Zoom Lion, which is a refuse truck. They have around 2,000 refuse trucks, and I think they're in about 7 different countries in Africa. And so actually Jake and I were part of a group from ZeroNox that flew over to Ghana, to Accra, Ghana, about 10 months ago to pitch to the Gotberg group electrification project to electrify these refuse trucks. And most people are probably wondering, well, why are you doing an on-road vehicle? ZeroNox is focused on off-road vehicles and heavy equipment. Well, in Africa, there's no distinction between on-road and off-road. So it wasn't an issue. Yeah, so Jake and I were over there checking out the refuse trucks. We did a presentation for them and, walking through the performance metrics, the environmental impact, the cost benefit analysis. So those are kind of the front end things that we have to do in order to talk these, fleets or, OEMs in certain cases into a partnership. And so it took 8 months, like, the process that we just talked about, which is, part of the reason that Jake and I are laughing is that's, that company that was the process, going through their legal, and we got everybody on board, but it still took time to get a contract in place. We got an MOU signed. We're working on the pilot program right now. And I think it's going to be an amazing project because in Africa, at least before I went over there, I was not thinking of Africa as like a potential hot spot for EVs, but actually it is. And they're really looking to, specifically the Japan group, they want to be the face of EV in Africa. They're looking for on-road, they're looking for off-road, they're looking for renewable microgrids. It's not just the US or Europe, who is into this. It's the entire world. And you get a place like Africa that has the potential to leapfrog us from an infrastructure standpoint because they're so far back. It's really an interesting situation. But I think maybe, Jake, if you could maybe go over the environmental and economic impact and analysis, because that's really an interesting case study.
Certainly. Kind of taking off my engineering hat and putting on more of a data scientist or a statistician hat, we were trying to estimate the impact of electrifying that fleet. And it turns out that using electricity is still not totally carbon neutral because that electricity has to come from somewhere. And if you're burning it out of a coal power plant, that obviously has its own impact. But when we dug into the grid that Ghana is using in Accra in particular, it is incredibly green. It's greener than the grid in California, most of the United States and Canada, mainly because it has a giant hydroelectric dam that provides something like 70% of power for the nation. And so that hydro-powered grid, coupled with their desire to sort of leapfrog, in their development to a more electric green future, really made it so that analysis was super compelling. It was something on the order of 400,000 metric tons of carbon that they would reduce, which is something like 1% of the emissions of the entire country of Ghana from this one project. It's just an incredible metric. To kind of put that in trees, I was trying to figure out how to make that more relatable to a non-engineer because, I don't think, maybe Jared does, but I don't think of carbon as, metric tons as a really meaningful unit. But it was 18 million mature trees. So not just a tree that you plant, but a tree that had grown to maturity and absorbed all the carbon it was going to absorb in its lifetime. 18 million trees. And that's just the impact for the first 5 years, just in diesel reductions versus their grid. When you get to the financial side, that's more of a question for Robert, but engineers and statisticians and economists, we think of return on investment. If I spend $100, how long would it take me to save $100 in expenses? The fuel cost is obvious. We know if you're not burning diesel fuel, you're not buying diesel fuel, and electricity is significantly cheaper than diesel. The non-obvious piece is that electric motors and systems, even down to the brakes, because you have regenerative braking, use like 40% less maintenance. And in Ghana in particular, because of the grade of diesel fuel that they're burning, they were using a lot of fuel injectors and fuel filters. So by removing that amount of maintenance, it was something like a 2.5-year return on investment, which is insane. Because if you can keep a garbage truck on the road for more than 2.5 years, you're making money, right? And that sort of economic and environmental combination made it really a no-brainer, to the point where the UN Green Fund got involved and wanted to put some money in to help finance the project.
Wow. Well, I guess one thing that came to my mind is just the nature of a garbage truck. There is a lot of that start and stop. And so with a combustion engine, there's a lot of energy being used just in that, just by the nature of the unit.
Mm-hmm. And as a bonus, I don't have to use my brake pads very much, because it's not 100% efficient, but every time you let off the pedal, the regenerative braking kicks in and will slow you down without using your brake pads. And I get a little bit of that back into the battery. That combination makes for an excellent use case for electric systems.
Well, I used to have a plug-in Prius, so the fun was driving down and trying to let it charge up to get an extra couple kilometers.
Yeah.
Although it almost became distracting because I kind of got obsessed with it. So this is my personality, though. That's not the car's issue. You sent me also one of the pictures you sent me was, it looks like an air, just talking about the different capabilities. It looks like a fan being pulled behind a tractor. So, so maybe again, I want to get into sort of that global, the microgrids and things like that. But I guess just clarify, what is that picture of and why?
Certainly. I can speak to this real briefly and pass it over to Robert. When we think about electric vehicles, we instantly think of cars and buses and long haul trucks, because that's what we see when we drive around. But there is an enormous pantheon of vehicles and equipment that run all day, every day to make the food that we eat. So all of this ag equipment, all of this mine equipment is kind of out of the public eye, but is just as important to convert. This in particular is an agricultural implement. An implement is a term of art. They don't like to call it the stuff we pull behind our tractor. They call them implements. So even tractors can be a bit snooty about their technical terms.
I see.
These implements, this one in particular allows you to spray water and pesticides and herbicides onto orchards. So if you ever had a cherry or a peach that didn't have a worm in it, it's thanks to a product like that. And these things burn, up to 10 gallons of diesel an hour as they go up and down the rows. So being able to address that particular energy use and convert it to electric is essential for the kind of a lower carbon, a more sustainable ag future.
So Robert, I guess the question, obviously if it's confidential, but how does that even come about? How do you end up with that project?
So we focused on looking for some manufacturers in the Central Valley. We're located in the San Joaquin Valley, the Central Valley of California, which is the kind of a breadbasket from an agricultural perspective in the world. And so there's actually quite a few different companies. This one is Aerofan. And so they're located close by to us. The ag community is, I think I may have mentioned this on the last time we talked.
Yeah, we talked about that.
That's why we started ZeroNox at the beginning, was to assist the ag community. And so we do have a pretty big focus in trying to partner with different pieces of equipment and vehicles that assist in ag. And so this was a relatively local manufacturer. In this case, that long process that we were discussing before was not necessary, because we could just meet up in person, and there wasn't a huge corporate, ladder and legal team to have to deal with. So
yeah,
I anticipate this project going through a lot quicker than some of the other ones. But there's, like Jake mentioned, there's tons of these sprayers and these shakers for nut trees, and there just all kinds of implements that you wouldn't realize are running all day long with an internal combustion engine during harvest. And here in the valley, it's a big issue, because California is coming down and mandating certain emission reduction restrictions on those farmers. And so how do you deal with that? How can you still perform and do what you need to do on the ag side while kind of maintaining the emission restrictions that they want? And so this is the beginning of that. And this is going to be a really good partnership. I think to show some of the other manufacturers what is possible and what the future is.
Okay, before we wrap up this interview, I just want to talk, sorry for taking on a couple rabbit trails there, but I did want to talk about the infrastructure. Jake, you mentioned it at sort of close to the beginning of the episode, and I want to bring it back. You talked about in Ghana how they have, it truly is the energy is being sourced through a clean energy, through a renewable source. We're getting a lot of, I think we're going to have our third lithium mining company on the show, third or fourth here in the span of 2 months. And until that point, in the last 3 years, we haven't had any. One of them is coming on, and they're going to talk about trying to set up in Ontario, which of course has the major hydropower. And comparing that to like in the Australian market. Can you give us a little picture? I mean, it'll just be at a high level, but just where we're really at from your perspective, and both you can jump in on this, from actually sourcing the power we need for the electrification from clean energy sources.
Certainly. The way you want to think of that infrastructure is the analog immediately is to gas stations. You think about how ubiquitous gas stations are in our everyday lives in North America. You know, you couldn't drive more than 50 miles without running into 10 of them. We need charging infrastructure at that density, if not even more. You know, having it on premises. So like I could have one on my house, I could have one at the office, I could have one where the buses go to sleep at night. You know, all of these sorts of electrical infrastructure needs to be there. But then I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with the duck curve. This is very infamous in electrical infrastructure. It's a demand curve, and it looks kind of like the outline of a duck because of how energy generation from solar and wind are very much concentrated, solar during the day and wind in the morning and evening.
Oh, I see.
But energy usage is more like a bell curve, where when everyone is awake and shows up at work, the energy spikes, and then it tapers off around 5, 6 in the afternoon. And then there's an evening spike as everyone turns on their lights and cooks dinner and runs laundry and whatever. So the trick with infrastructure like that is if everyone comes home from work and plugs in their vehicle at the same time, or if the farmers get done at dusk and come home and plug in their vehicles all at the same time, the grid is unprepared today for that sort of lifestyle. We just do not have the ability to sort of shift from when we create energy to when we need energy. And so this duck curve that you can Google, and maybe I'll send you a link so you can put it in the show notes. There you go.
I'm looking at it.
That duck curve is really something that keeps engineers up at night, because it is not an easy problem, and it is larger than any one company or any one individual could ever possibly deal with. This is a sort of global and national problem that we need to figure out how to store energy effectively and offset it to demand, and be able to generate it in some place and then transmit it long distances to others. Those ideas are all coupled in a sort of higher grid issue. But then we've been talking a little bit about ag and mining. There aren't outlets in the middle of a field, turns out. So you can't just take a break for lunch in the middle of your pistachio orchard and charge up your vehicle. We don't have that sort of capability right now. So being able to make microgrids away from developed areas, adjacent to a mine for the fleet that's there, et cetera. Oftentimes now it's just a diesel generator, right? Because you don't know how long the mine is going to be viable. That vein may go out in a year or two, and it's not worth building the infrastructure to drag power to it. If you can have mobile or semi-mobile modular microgrids, then you can set up enough power and storage to service your fleet. And then as the demand moves, you just pack it up and move it with your vehicles. So that is something ZeroNox is also actively working on. We have microgrids that we can deploy for fixed positions, think like cell phone towers and emergency response sort of situations. but then also just having reliable power. Now, the power in Ghana is very green, but it's not always reliable because their transmission system needs some upgrading. And so if the garbage doesn't get picked up for a week, that's real bad for a city government. You know, that's, if it's a month, that's catastrophic. Being able to have backup power available to even out those outages, right, and deal with transmissions issues is just as critical. So yeah, I think these microgrids and resilient grids that are powered by renewable sources need to develop hand in hand with the electric vehicle revolution.
Could you do it let's say in California, and I'm not that familiar with their infrastructure, but let's say in California, if the government said, okay, well, we're going to put one charging station in the middle of everybody's field that's at a certain size of field, which would obviously be a huge undertaking, and I mean there'd be some taxpayers that'd be upset about it, and you'd go through all of that. Could the system handle it though? If every farmer with a certain size plugged in all there at noon while they're on their lunch break, is there the back end infrastructure to handle that?
Today, no, not even close. If you think of, engineers are weird. If you generalize diesel fuel and gasoline and electric to just an energy source, and you look at how much energy we're consuming, the amount of energy we're consuming, even to like heat our homes and have hot water, and the amount of energy we're consuming compared to what electricity we produce is just nowhere close, like orders of magnitude low. We need to make a lot more power, and make it transmissible and storing to deal with those spikes in demand. And we're nowhere close. And I work for ZeroNox. I'm all in on the sort of green future. Solar and wind are not the answer there. Like, we need peaker plants that can turn on and off at a moment's notice, even when it's cloudy and even when it's not windy. And the best applicant we have right now for that is probably natural gas or nuclear. And nuclear has a bad stigma to deal with, and enormous amounts of engineering and regulatory hurdles to get started. So it's probably going to be natural gas for the foreseeable future.
And to add on to what Jake was saying, he laid out the huge hurdles just from an infrastructure standpoint. But then when we think about the whole point for especially governments in bringing the EV revolution into the US, we'll say, is to clean up the emissions. But if we're just getting the power from a dirty grid, we haven't accomplished anything. And so this idea of renewable sources is something that we're working heavily on, because, as Jake mentioned, there's nowhere near the power required to deploy the types of electric fleets. I'm thinking of California because we live in California, and I think it's something like 2035 that they want to go all EV. We don't even know where the power is coming from, much less it be renewable sources, right? And so there are huge conversations that need to be had. There's a lot of innovations that need to be had. And so that certainly is something that we're working on as well, because we do want to bring cleaner, higher performing technology. So we need to be a part of that solution. And so I hope more people realize that is I don't think a lot of people realize that's as big an issue as it is. I think they think that we can just throw a bunch of EVs on the road and that's going to solve the problem. It's nowhere near solving the problem. On road and off road, so whether you're in mining, ag, construction, we've got to figure out how to get, clean energy and how to get it to you. So that there certainly is some hurdles to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that lithium mine is coming on the show here the next, I think they're on next week or something, and they were talking about the Australian supply chain of lithium, and I mean, it was awful. Like, it was just, it's all backwards, because I mean, they measured how many miles all powered on gasoline you had to travel to get it there, and it was just like, it was mind-blowing. And But I think the one thing, though, I will say that's quite encouraging is at one time you had the pro oil and gas they would talk like that. And then people would be like, oh, yeah, you're just trying to protect the oil and gas. Now I find that the oil and gas sector is starting. I mean, we do a lot of shows in the energy sector. They're starting to really try to find these ways to be lower emissions and keep their and monitor things and all that sort of stuff. And now I'm finding on the electrification side, people are starting to talk about like, okay, we're gonna need natural gas to do this, or that's going to be part of the conversation starting to come to the middle. And I get to live in both worlds, so it's quite interesting that I'm starting to see the conversation become quite realistic. And that, I mean, maybe I'm being overly optimistic. That actually gives me quite a bit of hope that we can get something done.
You're absolutely right. And I just want to underline the supply chain for batteries. You mentioned lithium, which obviously that's the sort of marquee chemical. But there's two main chemistries right now. There's one that involves nickel and cobalt, and turns out Russia is a large exporter of nickel, and with the sanctions, they've stopped exporting nickel. So a lot of large EV battery packs are now kind of in limbo as they wait for a reliable supply. And then the other is this LFP, the lithium ferrous phosphate, which uses iron and phosphate and lithium together. And that's what we're using. And we're so far immune to that disruption. But even, the geopolitics of the day and supply chain issues can make getting the components to make a greener future hard. And we need to lean on our sort of legacy partners in energy and mining to help with the transition. And frankly, they don't have to be legacy. Like, these companies can be the future. If you have a big player like a BP or a Shell transition to hydrogen, which is still solidly in their will well, but much greener, they can help move us forward in this process. So yeah, I have some glimmer of hope that the practical realities will drive us towards a mutually beneficial solution. But there's just kind of enormous unresolved issues on the horizon. And I hope we can come to reasonable and rational choices. We're doing it from our perspective, right? Some of these companies are coming to us because the government's mandating greener stuff, and some of them are coming to us because they can, they want this of their own volition, independent of regulation. And so we're happy to have both customers. We don't particularly care why you're using our products. There's no litmus test for how zealous you are about the environment, right? And trust me, farmers are strange. You would think they'd be really anti-regulation, but and they would be, kind of pish posh on the whole environmental thing, but they're strangely very practical environmentalists. Like they live with the land, they see the damage that's done to it, and they know how to make things sustainable, but they also need to get the crop out. And so if the product matches the performance they need and happens to be greener, they'll buy that up. They don't need to,
And I think that's a good example of sort of where things are going. And Robert, I want to sort of close off with a question to you is, do you have to, when you're trying to do business development, like you end up in Ghana, do you have to sort of pick your spots? Like if you're in somewhere like in Ontario and Toronto, they have that hydropower. You sort of need to do market research to find the infrastructure that sort of can match what you're delivering, or does that end up sort of chasing in circles? So you just sort of have to go to the OEMs and your partners and sort of let them sort of assess where they are, like physically where they're located.
So for a fleet, absolutely, you need to know. For an OEM, it's different because they're going to be selling it and we don't know exactly where that product is going to end up. But for a fleet, it is paramount. So in the case of these refuse trucks, we're talking about 1,000 refuse trucks needing to be charged, at night. So you can imagine the type of power required to do that. And so, I mean, if you don't have the infrastructure part figured out, then there's going to be a lot of paperweights that are going to be sitting over there. So that is
Right.
From a fleet side, the infrastructure, how are we going to charge these is as important as actually electrifying the product itself, because who cares if you can electrify it if you can't charge and use it. So you're absolutely right. You have to take that into account. And we were fortunate in the case of the Despond group that they happen to have some power. But when we're looking at some other projects in Africa, it's just it's a good spot for EVs, as I mentioned earlier. But we do anticipate having to bring in some microgrid, some renewable microgrid technology to assist in the charging. And I foresee that in a lot of the applications that we're going to do, as Jake mentioned, if it's an ag or mining or construction and you're too far away from where power normally is, we're probably going to have to create, these power stations for you, which isn't a bad thing. We need more microgrids. I'm a huge believer in microgrids. It's safer, reliable, ability for renewable. You can have power on an island, so you don't have to worry about if it goes off, somewhere along the grid, then everyone's down until that gets fixed. So it's an advantage in a lot of ways. But as you mentioned, we certainly need to account for where is the power going to come from when we go to electrify a fleet.
I wanted.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that, Jared. I wanted to underline something you mentioned. We think of electric vehicles today kind of like appliances. When you plug it in, it just starts using energy. With our telematics system and the new generation of the powertrain, we can actually stagger when the fleet charges and put some intelligence behind it, use an algorithm and remote commands. So we can say like, okay, fleet, unit 0 through 50, go ahead and start charging. And then as we get feedback from the power grid, we can tell, are we close to hitting our max load? If not, okay, 50 to 100, you can turn on. So we're not just making an electric version of a gas vehicle. It's like going from a dumb phone to a cell phone, but not just a cell phone to a smartphone, right? We're kind of skipping the flip phone phase of technology for EVs because of these issues. And so I just want to highlight that struggle, and then one of the solutions that we're working on at ZeroNox to overcome that, along with our microgrids.
Gentlemen, it's an amazing conversation. I mean, obviously, I could keep you here for another hour to keep going through and all the possibilities, but I won't put you through that. Thank you very much for coming on the show again, Robert, and good to have you on the show, Jake. Just a lot of good information, and I always appreciate it when people are willing to come on, not just talk about their products, but also the bigger situations that a lot of people are they either care about or they're just trying to learn about it and gain an understanding. I know lots of people, I know quite a few older people that listen to this show that are just using it as to sort of stay up to date. I have people approach me about it. So I really do appreciate you both kind of taking the time to walk through that side of things as well.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Happy to do it. Thanks, Jared.
All right, come back soon, gentlemen. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for watching. We covered a lot of ground today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please keep suggesting guests. When you're looking at what ZeroNox is doing, and then all the sort of the contributing factors of getting electrification in place, and the collaborations that'll need to be put in place, you'll see how many more guests we would have to come on to even scratch the surface of what it would take. So if you know anybody, please give us suggestions. We'd love to talk to them and see if it would be good to have them on the show as well. And we appreciate all the suggestions we have had over the last year or so. So thank you for watching. Please keep subscribing and sharing and commenting and suggesting questions to us. We do appreciate it. We will see you on the next episode